So firstly, like others, I want to take this opportunity to wish you, Minister Donnelly, all the very, very best in your new role. It is indeed a great honour for you, not just for you, but for your family and for your friends, to see you serve as the leader of and the head of the health services over the coming years. Having sat on the opposition benches and on the Health Committee with Minister Donnelly, I know that he has an understanding of the issues and the crises that face us right across the health services. While we may disagree on the required solutions, I do believe that the new Minister is aware of the level of work that is needed to rectify the many strands of the health service which have been forced to struggle due to the actions of his predecessors and indeed of previous governments. The new Minister can be sure that, as I did with his predecessor on repeal, on COVID and on other significant healthcare matters, I will work constructively with him and I will offer solutions as I have always done. I will be constructive, but as the lead opposition health spokesperson, I take my role seriously and I will work and engage constructively with those on the opposition benches as well as the government benches for the improvement of our health services for patients and for healthcare workers alike. And I say that notwithstanding any signals that came from others on the opposition benches at the weekend. Minister Donnelly, you can be sure that while I will be constructive, I will also hold you to account. I know that this is no more than you would expect. And now, with those somewhat formalities out of the way, we turn to the revised estimates for the health services. And I note the questions and answers format, and I welcome that. It's a new departure. I think this is a good idea. I'm going to do 7 and 3, as I've said. I want to state at the outset that I have to be very critical of the presentation of the revised estimates. It's not intended in any way to be critical of the Minister or a criticism of how you will in the future run the department, because these estimates came to us last week when the department was still the responsibility of Minister Harris. Only a few hours before we came down here to review how the estimated spending of €20 billion of health service money did we receive a briefing document. However, the document didn't offer much by way of clarity as to exactly where the additional COVID-19 spending is going, definitive detail of how it is being spent, or indeed where it is being spent. I thank the Minister and his office for this briefing, but again, it's very scant on detail. I hope that this is not a signal of what will come. I hope that we can expect more detail. And I hope that you will ensure that under your stewardship that the presentation of estimates will change substantially and that they will incorporate a lot more detail and also be open to scrutiny by the Health Committee. I would remind Minister Donnelly that only last year he called on the Minister and the Department officials to read the PBO's report on the revised estimates. And Minister, these are your own words. You said it is impossible to conduct decent scrutiny because the numbers are not comparable, and that there are a number of challenges in undertaking effective scrutiny of this money because we are not able to compare the figures from today to the figures from December due to the figures not being like for like. The same unfortunately applies today, but we have the added complication because we have additional insertions of figures for COVID-19. In the estimates we have headings such as primary care reimbursement services COVID-19 actions 110 million. HSE COVID-19 actions 1.6 billion, capital COVID-19 actions including ICT 220 million. The briefing document we got a few hours ago tries to give us additional information. However, it falls short of presenting a detailed breakdown of what and how the money will be spent beyond the inclusion of micro subheadings. I'll cover this more in my questions at the end. There are many questions that we have to ask, and the estimates are an opportunity for us to ask questions of the Minister. Will this money be used to retain the bed capacity which was secured to prepare for a surge in the pandemic? Hundreds of beds were reopened, but yet today we hear that there are 192 people on trolleys. For years I was pleading with the Minister to open closed beds, only to be told that there were no beds in the system. They magicked up 1,000 beds. We need to keep those beds opened. And while we're on the subject of trolleys, Minister, I have to ask you if you will continue to refer, as you did in opposition, to the INMO trolley figures. They are the figures taken every day. It is ridiculous that successive ministers get into a row with the organisation that compiled these figures. Can we settle on it that we will use the INMO figures from here on out, as you did when you were in opposition? When we look at the December vote 28 estimates for 2020, we look at the revised estimates, I have to ask, how can some of the estimates not have changed? It seems unbelievable that the department would produce these estimates and try to maintain that some areas of spending outside of COVID-19 won't increase and others won't decrease just by virtue of the new dynamic facing the health service. Not only this, but it's probable that there may be slower than usual provision of treatments and procedures provided due to the new infection control protocols. Such a situation may result in changed figures from those included in the estimates. As a result of this, I don't know how today's estimates outside of COVID-19 changes can have the same spending estimates as December 2019. I know the members of this House and the general public are taking into account that the deferral of treatment may result in increased costs when treatment is ultimately delivered. An analysis of basic health economics shows us that delayed care can mean an increase in costs, as diagnostic tests may be needed to be retaken. The illness itself might escalate and become more advanced, necessitating more intensive treatment and indeed a longer inpatient stay. As I previously referenced, depending on the scale of the effective reduction in the use of the public health service, there may be increased waiting times for both inpatient and outpatient procedures post the pandemic. All of these effects are likely to result in a significant knock-on non-pandemic public healthcare spending late in 2020 and into 2021. This hasn't been factored into the new revised estimates. I'm also cognizant, as I speak here today, that until and unless an effective COVID-19 vaccine is developed, increased costs for PPE, contact tracing, etc. will continue to put spending pressures on the Vote 38 into the future. This means that we may well be back debating supplementary estimates later in the year. Minister, my questions relate to areas where there really should be more detail from your department. For instance, on primary care reimbursement COVID-19 actions, beyond stating that sanction of the €110 million was provided to the HSE on the 16th of March for GP services and is included in the funding approved by Government, we get no further breakdown of how this was distributed, who received it and for what. Other procurement accounts for €89 million as the estimated cost to date. What does that incorporate exactly? Similarly, can the Minister clarify that the planned €62 million for absenteeism is in relation to sickness due to COVID-19? There's a planned cost of €74 million on ventilators, with €18 million spent. Can we get additional detail of the number of ventilators that we have procured, and if we now have a sufficient quantity, including for the risk of a second wave? On the City West isolation facility, €9 million has been spent to date. The contract, I believe, has been cancelled. So is the state liable for the other €16 million as outlined in the planned costs in the departmental briefing? Minister, we know that approximately €320 million has been spent on PPE. The Parliamentary Budget Office has outlined that in their report, and yet we have consistently been told that the HSE has spent €1 billion on PPE. So which is it? Who's correct? How much has been spent? Finally, on the issue of the private hospital deal, Minister, we see that €258 million has been estimated to the 12th of July, but will the total spending equal the planned gross cost of €426 million? Can you give us some clarity on that? Also, on the deal, we have no further information on what we have got so far for the money. For the €258 million that's been spent, what use was made of the capacity? How many procedures were carried out? Does it represent value for money? Have your department had a look at that? It's disappointing that we don't have a further breakdown of the information, and I know the Minister will share this disappointment where he's sitting over here on the opposition benches. Minister, you've promised a new departure in the Department of Health, so can I ask that you would examine where the capacity exists to purchase, not to purchase services from the private sector, but to actually purchase facilities when those facilities may come up for sale. It's been done in other jurisdictions. It makes a lot of sense. It represents good value for money. So rather than paying into the private sector, who have to take a profit off the top of it, that if the opportunity arose, you would consider purchasing those facilities from within the private sector.